5 a.m. Late spring in Wisconsin. A man drunkenly stumbles behind the Club Millennium in downtown La Crosse. He spies an open door and he walks in, goes to the basement, grabs some t-shirts and a can of gasoline and sets the place ablaze. He was apprehended by police a couple of hours later, and then a week later, he was convicted of arson and reckless endangerment. That man was Steve Phelan, and at the time he was 23 years old. He had no prior record, and he was suffering from depression and a history of other mental illness. During his conviction trial, he told the court that arson was his way of crying for help. The judge, attempting to be lenient, sentenced him to 1 year of house arrest and 12 years of probation. But the judge made a fatal mistake because of the state of criminal justice in our nation. See, in Wisconsin, where Steve Phelan lived at the time, people in prison, on probation, and on parole could not vote. And when Steve Phelan moved to Florida a few years later, he still could not vote, because in Florida, at that time, people were not able to vote, felons were not able to vote permanently after their convictions. Florida and Wisconsin are not the only two states in our country that practice felony disenfranchisement. In case you don't remember, I sometimes forget, we have 50 states. 48 of them disenfranchise felons after conviction. 11 of them do so permanently, restricting the right to vote for convicted felons for the rest of their lives. 17 of them can restrict the right to vote for felons when they're in prison, on probation, or on parole. And 20 states restrict the right to vote for felons while they are in prison. Only 2 states, Maine and Vermont, directly north of us, don't restrict the right to vote for felons at all. This sets us apart from almost every other liberal democracy. It wasn't always this way. Felony disenfranchisement comes from English common law, a concept known as civil death, where criminals were stripped of all of their rights after conviction. In the early colonies, felony disenfranchisement was practiced as a punishment for election-related crimes, election fraud. If you tamper with ballots, you are disenfranchised. There's a certain symmetry there. But come the Civil War and the ratification of the 15th Amendment, giving black people the constitutional right to vote for the first time in our nation's history, southern states widely adopted felony disenfranchisement and discriminatory laws and policing in order to undo that change, in order to strip black people from the right to vote through alternative means. Felony disenfranchisement has come a long while since then, but it still serves the same purpose today. It's not only practiced in the South either. 48 states do this. Today, in 4 states, in 2016, in 4 states, Kentucky, Virginia, Florida, and Tennessee, more than 20% of all black adults could not vote because of felony convictions. It still serves the same purpose that it did during Reconstruction. Felony disenfranchisement is not practiced in other liberal democracies because the right to vote is the fundamental marker of who is a person in a democracy, right? We are all adults in this room, or at least I don't see any children, which means that we all have the right to vote. If we are a citizen, we are all rational people possessed with the ability to choose things for ourselves and to self-govern. To strip away that right to vote is to tell somebody that they are subhuman, that they are no longer a citizen, that they are not a member of a society, that they are somehow a beast, an undead person. Stripping away the right to vote takes away somebody's civil life. It takes their voice out of democracy, quite literally. It makes it so they can no longer officially take part in our society. Now, felony disenfranchisement, if we are to stay an open, free, and inclusive democracy, we must get rid of it. In the words of Supreme Court Justice Brennan in the landmark case Furman versus Georgia in 1972, even the vilest criminal remains a human being possessed of common human dignity. To strip the right to vote from anybody denies that dignity and disrespects that human person. Now, it might sound like a radical proposal to change the laws in 48 different states, and it's part of the federal system of America that makes this so difficult. It really shouldn't be that radical. It's not practiced almost anywhere else. The good thing is that in recent years, we've made progress. For example, in December, the new governor of Kentucky extended the right to vote to all felons post-sentence. And earlier in 2019, in Colorado, parolees were given the right to vote back. And the same thing happened in 2018 in New York. In 2017, in Wyoming, nonviolent felons were given the right to vote post-sentence. And finally, in 2018, the man that I started talking about, Steve Phelan, wrote to the New Yorker that he was possessed by a wild and full smile and a sense of agency he hadn't felt since he was 23 when he was convicted of arson, because he was living in Florida at the time. And in November of 2018, Florida voters passed a constitutional amendment by a wide margin that it gave felons the right to vote post-sentence. Now, the laws and regulations surrounding that amendment are being battled out in Florida court right now, because these proposals, the things that happened in Wyoming and Colorado and New York and Florida, these proposals don't go far enough. If it is discriminatory and cruel and wrong to restrict the right to vote for felons after their sentences, it is discriminatory, wrong, and cruel to do so while they are serving their time in prison, on probation, or on parole. It is wrong regardless. Now, as somebody else mentioned, we have elections coming up, and elections are how we get things done in this country. In November, and I hope to see you all voting, in November, when we go to the polls, spend a second of time thinking about the millions of living, breathing, feeling, working adults in this country who cannot do that same thing, who cannot vote because of their felony convictions. Bring them with you to the polls in your minds and in your hearts, and vote for candidates who will give them that right, who will restore them as full members of our society. Felony disenfranchisement has been pervasive and oppressive for more than 100 years in our country, since the end of Reconstruction. It is past time to get rid of it.